And let me say welcome to all of you who are joining us here, here in the Zoom room and watching this on the recording afterwards. Delighted to have you with us. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United in Learning program for the General Counsel Office, and I'm also a minister in a church in Toronto. So I wear two hats, which gives me a really interesting connection into this program because I am both a presenter and the audience. And having said that, my role really is to monitor the chat and to curate the questions and to turn it over to the experts who know far more than I do about these things. And so I'm going to do that without further ado. And as I do that, I'm going to mute everybody's mic so we don't hear stray dogs and fire alarms in the background. But Erik Mathiesen, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and a belated happy St. Patrick's Day. The most activity I've seen in a long time, in years actually, was the number of questions coming in about the treasurer role, lots of transition questions, lots of role questions, and that's what we're featuring tonight. But before we do that, regulars will know that we always show the creed as a reminder that we are here being church. And we also take a moment to for a land acknowledgement. As we approach Earth Week in the coming weeks, perhaps an even more apt reminder that we have lots to learn from our Indigenous peoples. So if we could just take a moment and think about where you are, I'm in Toronto with the national office, and the national office is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We recognize and deeply appreciate their contribution to this place. We also recognize the contributions of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this community, our province, and our country. And as settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective conscience to make the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. So may it be so. With that, we'll jump into the regulars will know the format. A couple of key reminders in terms of dates and activities that might still be on your to-do list. Assessment notices are out there on your Church Hub account. We've talked previously about the cost of living groups. That information is online and will of course apply need to be dealt with before July 1st. And also just progress on the insurance initiative. The December 22 and March 23 renewals are underway and more to come on that. The main thing though is treasurer role and tensions and most common items. And this is coming up. The regulars, there are many of you who have been at this a long time, but there's also a lot of new folks out there. So hopefully there's a few nuggets in here for everybody. And then Steve will talk a bit further about our strategic plan and the treasurer network concept that he mentioned earlier. Okay, I have to move a mouse here. There we go. Okay, so first of all, for assessments, I mentioned it already. It's on Church Hub. We do an advertisement for that all the time, and there have been some refinements to, we keep improving Church Hub. A lot of the stuff we're doing these days, the church used to, frankly, take forever to launch anything and then try to get it right and work out the bugs in advance. With COVID and everything else, we sometimes rush things out there and fix it as we go. So bear with us, and we learn something new every day. But the assessments are out there, and in certain parts of the country, folks are looking at the final piece of increases that brings the entire, all pastoral charges up to the same method and share of contribution to the broader church. And of course, now it maps to revenues. So if your revenues, for example, are decreasing, so too will your assessment. We're all in this together. Similarly, all the information around cost of living groups is online and would have been mailed out to the impacted areas. I think 43% of pastoral charges were looking at an increase, and the rest had no change or were even lower, but would be red circled. There would be no reduction per se. So I'm hoping that everyone here, if you're here, that should mean that you have a Church X account, and you should also have your Church Hub account. And if there's anyone out there who isn't signed up, all it takes is reporting your email or having someone do that on Church Hub. And this is how you do it. Basically, the main pastoral charge admin, which is the broadest number of uses that is available, will log in, put in the new treasurer information, and make sure it's charge treasurer. And this basically alerts Susan Jackson that you need to be onboarded. And many of you will know her from the statistics work. She will take care of that for you. And we're just debugging it now, but the plan is for treasurers to have all the same access to reports and so on that the church admin role does, so that you don't need to be doing handoffs, or you basically have the ability to handle all the statistics and get your assessments and your other information in addition to that other role. So, how is being a United Church treasurer like the Hotel California? I thought I'd start with an attempt at humor. And the answer here, of course, is you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And there's also a line in there that we are all prisoners of our own device. So you choose which one feels right for you, but treasurers are valued, hard to get, and often hard to exit and get transition. So this is from my new treasurers. I tried to provide assurance. There's two basic rules for being a treasurer. About 15 years ago, my local UCW presidents authorized me to be as candid as this. So there's two rules to being an effective church treasurer. One, it's not about me. You're the messenger. You have to run with stuff. And number two is do not blank your UCW. And if this was a live workshop and not being recorded, I could use the words that I was authorized to use, which are really quite strong.
Yes, I am recording this, Eric. Do you want that done for posterity?
I will. I have said all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so the treasurer role. First of all, just from the manual, this has been any number of people raising this question. The treasurer is one of the roles that does need to be a member of the charge. So does the chair. Interestingly, the board secretary doesn't, or at least the manual is silent on that. So that's raised questions for a lot of people around being able to find someone who can do all the various aspects of the work. And my answer to that is there's a trade-off. There's a balancing act. You could have, in a smaller setting, it's very likely that the treasurer is very hands-on, perhaps does all the accounting or a lot of it, might handle the payroll too, or and again, one of the questions we've been getting, an honorarium is often paid. So, I mean, I was a treasurer in downtown Toronto. I might was volunteering, say 10 or 12 hours a week. It never occurred to me that there'd be honorariums, but it also never occurred to me that treasurers would be doing all the things that they might do in a smaller setting. So a hands-on treasurer does not just the reporting to the board and attending a meeting, but quite often a lot of the bookkeeping too. A hands-off treasurer can be one where a lot of that work is done elsewhere or by others, and with a much greater focus on board reporting. And that there's really no basis, or at least in my opinion, no basis for an honorarium for that. And if you need to trade off, I've given this advice any number of times, find someone. The problem you're trying to solve is to have the best accounting, bookkeeping, have that in good shape that you can find. If that means having someone else be the nominal treasurer who just receives the reports or something, do that. Frankly, treasurers of most nonprofits, certainly any larger nonprofit, wouldn't ever touch a book or have access to an assistant. So then there's the issue of any form of compensation. So charity law precludes any director being reimbursed for serving in that role. And they even asked that question on the T3010. It's the question C8. And if you answer that question yes, you're likely to get what's called an education or a clarification phone call from the CRA, because again, directors and trustees are supposed to be doing it on a volunteer basis. Now, interestingly, the United Church of Canada Act does provide for ministers to be on board and specifically to be trustees. And this is a case where specific legislation can be an exception to general legislation. And so, and again, hopefully all treasurers have a special place in heaven. Common tensions. Again, this comes up, especially when you're new. You need to first learn how things work as they are. And then you start hearing from folks like Clyde or myself or Angelica that there's, well, in fact, you're supposed to be doing it a different way. So there's lots of nuanced things where there may be an established practice, and this can arise with working with restricted funds and their purpose and what they're allowed to be used for, or sometimes trustees or UCW. A minister's lived experience. If a minister has been a long time somewhere else and the procedures were a certain way, they just assume that's the correct way. And of course, CRA compliance and so on. We've talked about all of these at one time or another on these webinars. So how we've always done it, balancing act versus the correct procedure. There's lots of inconsistent practices out there. Whenever anyone calls me, it doesn't matter what they say, when they have a problem, I guarantee you that I can respond with my cute line, "You are not alone." Because it literally, there's just, we are a grassroots, bottom-up organization, and there's just all kinds of both interpretation and degrees of compliance. However, when you step in as a treasurer, you're the messenger, you're needing to fix some of these things. I always say, try to correct it as early as you can, but none of these things is a hill to die on. If folks are totally adamant about a certain procedure, then make sure the board, not just you, is on, hey, we're doing it that way because we always have, and maybe you do more research, or I'm happy. Or regional resources are happy to comment as well. And again, the best time is when there's a change. Either a new treasurer sometimes has a fresh set of eyes, a new minister coming in. There might be a chance to improve things or just look at things a slightly different way. Same thing with the balancing act with trustees. The church treasurer, first and foremost, needs to pay the bills. So there's lots of, it's not uncommon to have back and forth around the idea of asset preservation and maintaining the building versus program spending, and just making sure that those decisions are made as transparently as possible. There are places where trustees act in a very sort of almost like a separate entity, and I am always reminding folks that that's not the way the United Church set it up. And there just needs to be all kinds of mutual respect. At the end of the day, trustees are members of the congregation too, and they have been assigned a very specific role under the United Church of Canada Act. So we start getting into tension sometimes with a minister. There are ministers out there that think it's your job to complete their tax forms. And that's been escalated to me several times this year. And I just sort of sit there and say, what does it say on the form? At the end of the day, we always want to support and encourage our minister every way we can. But if they have tax forms they need to sign and file, then they need to do that. Travel reimbursement is another one that is pretty common for treasurers, where ministers are needing to travel significant distances within a charge, and travel for reimbursement. The CRA requires that it be properly logged, and there's a balancing act of trying to also protect the privacy of individuals in the case of pastoral visiting and so on. So again, these are things that need to get sorted out. So for travel reimbursement, as I said, and this is true for absolutely any procedural change, or personnel change, get clarity up front and have principles or practices documented. If you have to deal with it situationally when it arises, there's a much greater chance of misunderstanding or tension or even conflict. And for example, the CRA is very clear that mileage to and from the workplace is not reimbursable. However, we have all kinds of unusual arrangements in multi-point situations, and again, nail that up front. The rule of thumb that most pastoral charges use is to exclude mileage to and from the pastoral charge on the scheduled workday. Okay, another one that we've had a ton of questions on is T4A reporting for pulpit supply, and the issue of reporting paying mileage. So pulpit supply people aren't employees, and therefore, from a CRA perspective, they may have, that individual might have some accounting and reporting that they do, that what's travel and what's claimable this way and that. But for you as the purchaser, it's all a fee for service. It goes in box 48. If you pay travel by paying an actual invoice, then it doesn't need to go on the T4A. But again, it's arguably all of it could and should be there. So getting on again, a question that's come up several times. We have directors and officers coverage, certainly for treasurers, but for the entire board, and for congregations and pastoral charges. And I emphasize that because it matters on entity. If you're on a food bank board or something else, you need to have your own director, or frankly any charitable endeavor or nonprofit endeavor. You should look to see if your entity has directors and officers insurance. But basically, we have a broad definition on and all congregations, pastoral charges, and for that matter, regional councils and their committees and national have directors and officers coverage when serving that role for the United Church. It's a very broad definition. It even includes past individuals. Here's a clarification, and again, from a bit of traffic this year, and this is from Clyde. Clyde, you originally raised it. Accountants are arguing about this, at least in Ontario. Is that correct?
Quite right. They want to discuss it and they want to do it themselves, basically. But so far at this point in time, I've checked with a number of accountants that gave me a little bit of clarification on it, and that what we can say and can't say as a non-accountant who's doing the work. And it's not just a non-accountant, it's an accountant who is not in public practice. Because if they're in public practice, they're insured for it and that they can do this. But even for what we would look at as being a compilation or a notes to the reader, you've got to be very cautious. As soon as you take an opinion and state it, you can be hung out to dry, to be quite honest. You're best to not give an opinion on it, just to say that you've reviewed the information provided by the management of the church. And you have to be very clear on every page to say that the information provided is for internal use only. And if you don't have that, and some bank were to take it and give you a loan based on the information and find later that there's a problem, then we can be in other problems with this. So you've got to be cautious if you're doing the statements for your church. If you want outside help with it, one of the best ways to do it is to find the church who's your neighbor. And the two treasurers swap the books. And you do the review on the other person's books. If you're both getting it done, there's no cost to it, or shouldn't be. And you can make the comments the way they're outlined here. It's all considered internal because we are all part of the national church. And so you can call it an internal audit and there's not much can be done with it.
And folks, just to say, our the manual itself prescribes a fairly rigorous list, and in fact calls it an audit, even though that's not technically correct. But overall, the advice we've been giving for the better part of a decade now is have your finances at that annual review, get the best independent review you can find and afford, and we talked about a treasurer swap. It could be someone in the congregation who's not on the board. But Clyde has been good enough to list some of the specific language that he got from his contacts here. So we flag it for you here, not to belabor the point, but it is that time of year. Another one that's created quite a flurry, at least in a couple of regions, is the notion of how much disclosure to have around individual compensation, particularly at an annual meeting. And if that can be a broader conversation for a board to have, and they can decide, frankly, whatever they want. But what a financial person and an HR person would typically say is that it's best practice to aggregate compensation costs to afford even a degree of confidentiality. If you only have a minister, you're going to know anyway. But the M&P committee is charged with that, paying a fair wage, gauging performance. And in my experience, most of the time, actually, where there are individuals demanding to know, there's some axe to grind out there, or some other agenda that is simply not worth pursuing in an annual meeting context. If someone has performance feedback, M&P is a vehicle for that. There's different ways to do it, but do not do it in an annual meeting. Okay, again, because it's the season, I think most folks on this call will know that the ministers, United Church ministers, and all ministers, frankly, qualify for a tax deduction based on what's called the Clergy residence deduction. And it dates back to when many ministers lived in manses and so on. But it can be, depending on the individual lifestyle choices a minister makes, it can be a significant tax deduction, or it could be zero. I always say that if you live in your mother's basement for free, your clergy residence deduction is zero. And each year, and this does not always happen. In fact, I'm amazed at how infrequent or how often I'm told that they don't do it, but ministers should be completing this form every year. They aren't, if you file on, electronically, you don't have to submit it with your filing return, but you have to have it available. And the treasurer or the M&P committee, somebody at the church, needs to certify. There's a certification section, even though it's an individual tax form. In my case, it's usually the treasurer. I do the one for all the national staff and the regional staff. You certify that they are, in fact, employees whose role and nature of employment qualifies them for this deduction. And then some ministers, most ministers will have some degree of tax deduction available to them. Then there's a question of, do they ask for credit for that? To basically say, in anticipation of that tax deduction at tax time, for many reasons, but quite often just pure cash flow, folks will ask to have their tax withholding reduced at source. And there's a process for this, which is a separate form, a T1213. And again, ministers would normally expect to see this in the fall, because you basically, the taxpayer needs to submit this in the fall, give it over to whoever's handling their payroll, their ADP account, and ADP would update the records to reduce the amount of CPP and income tax deducted.
I make one comment on that slide, Eric.
Go ahead.
Before we move ahead. ADP no longer makes that update. You do it, because we have control through team pay.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
We have to make the update. We are not supposed to be taking and reducing income tax withholdings if we don't have that form. And that form is required every year. Currently, they're about 4 months behind in approving them. And I have actually seen 2 or 3 declined this year.
And again, as a local administrator, this is, you request permission from the CRA to do this. You don't ever want to mess with the CRA. So again, this is a possible source of tension, because it affects the paycheck of individuals. Clyde, do you have any comment on sort of, if someone got one last year and they've applied this year, do you sort of leave them reduced? I mean, I would be tempted to do that.
I have done that, but then we have to make sure when we get the letter from the CRA that we adjust the amounts because of what we've already deducted.
Yeah, so that creates work too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, when you do this, you also need to prepare, and this I always thought was goofy, but you have to, when you're reducing your tax, when you're submitting a T1213, they ask you to attach that the coming year's deduction form. And you haven't even done it. You don't even know where you're living. So it's an estimate, or you don't know where you might be living a year from now. So I understand it to be an estimate. Clyde, would you agree with that?
It is an estimate. And if anything changes, you're supposed to go back and go through the application process again.
But no one's doing that.
That's how I had described it in my cover letter with them, though. Every year I say this is an estimate because I'm not anticipating moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to say, folks, this is stuff to be aware of as opposed to your job.
No, this is my job. I'm the minister.
Yeah.
Eric signs my form and then it's up to me to file it.
Yeah. And if he doesn't file it and doesn't get a tax return or tax deduction, that's either his choice or his action and has nothing to do with me, even though I certified it. So with that, I'm going to catch my breath. We're doing a lot of talking, but we are coming up to a question section. But you're going to get a nicer voice than mine now. Angelica, can you take the next few slides?
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric, and hello, everyone. Just a few slides on a couple of tips and reminders related to payroll. These are some of the questions that come through our payroll team and having to answer. The first slide you will see it's related to your pensionable and insurable earnings review period, the notice that you receive. There's different possible reasons why you are receiving this notice. It's never the same reason. And so we've put this in slide, some of those possibilities, and we've also put in this slide some of the ways in which pastoral charges are dealing with it. If it doesn't fall within what you've experienced and you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to the payroll team and they will be able to help you for your specific situation.
And this seems to be the time I'm getting queries. So this is the time of year where the computer spits them out from the CRA, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we've had quite a few which we have responded to, and these are just highlights of them. The other area, the other reminder and tip is about your contact person, authorized contact person for ADP, and the importance of having that first contact in a backup. We've also received instances where there is no first contact and there is no backup and you're starting from zero. So in that case, there is a process involved of completing a form, but if you're challenged with it, again, connect with payroll team. We are going to be able to assist you and actually expedite the process for that ADP contact to be in place sooner rather than later.
Okay. And just to say, Angelica, in COVID, the combination have really built out where the team can help. For any new treasurers out there, you used to have to just go to ADP. You had to deal with their phone queue. We've now got it so it's a little bit more doing the work ourselves. But Angelica's team, if you've authorized them, and that only had to happen at one point in the past, and keeping a contact person current, if you've authorized them, they're a fabulous resource.
Thank you. And the other piece is with team pay, as you know, the entering of information and the setup of information of a new hire is critical and crucial. And so although you have the pastoral charge new hire form with all of the formulas that can assist you in the calculation of it, if it's still a challenge for you, again, our payroll team is there to support you, and you're more than welcome to call us, and we will walk you through the different modules that you will need to be able to enter. And lastly, this is a question that I often get with regards to the employment of a new candidate or a new employee, whether it's an employee or is it an independent contractor, and the differences. And this chart will help you and assist you in differentiating which is which. But again, I find that there's, some nuances in some of those positions that are being filled, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions if you just shoot me an email. And I've had those, and we've been able to resolve whether it's an employee or an independent contractor. But this is your sort of go-to as a first hand to determine which way to go.
And just to say, every year, fewer during COVID, admittedly, because they were busy doing other things. But every year I hear of United Churches having to pay significant, we're talking thousands of dollars of fines if they've been, if in a payroll audit, they're found to have been fast and loose with these interpretations. One of the things you could try is actually phoning the CRA payroll line and getting a verbal opinion. And if it happens to be the one you wanted to hear, write down the time and date and document it, because the chances are if you call tomorrow, you might get a different one. So just if you get that, at least have that in your toolkit as well. And there is complexity, particularly with choir people or musicians. If in doubt, though, err on the side of part-time employee.
Absolutely. And so the last piece I just wanted to say, the usage of Church Hub, how critical and important is to update the positions. That's also another resource that we have in order to determine who is a treasurer within your church. So please update us any information related to the positions as soon as you can when there is a change. And here are the emails and phone numbers that you can reach not only ADP, but the payroll team as well.
Okay. So we have a scheduled break here. Steve, how are things in the chat box?
Oh, pretty good. I've collected a few questions here. So let me just move this over onto this screen. John Martin was asking about half an hour ago if a treasurer can also be a trustee.
Absolutely. There was a time, the short answer is yes, period. In a smaller setting, you could easily wear multiple hats. The manual prescribes, certain roles, but very common to wear multiple hats.
And that's true in my congregation. Our treasurer is also a trustee.
So am I.
So a few questions about the minister's travel allowance. Apparently this is causing friction. Jeff says, I think with some chagrin or something, we have a minister who's claimed the 2.2 kilometers to the food bank and back.
Well, there'll be lots of different answers. Steve, you might have a comment on that too. I don't, I don't see claiming mileage in my, I live in Toronto, I might drive around a bit. That is a bit granular. On the other, I would have a conversation about that, but that's the kind of thing where it's really, again, if those kinds of expectations are contemplated at the beginning of a relationship, it can be tricky for a treasurer individually to raise this. Maybe it's, maybe others don't care for 2 kilometers or want to be, generous type thing. But it does sound a bit granular to me. I'd welcome any other comments.
Yeah, no, I think it really depends on why the minister is going to the food bank. If the minister is going to the food bank as a part of her job because she's delivering the congregation's contributions and she wants to claim $1 for doing so, I guess, that seems pretty small to me, and I don't think I've ever claimed something quite that small, but maybe she's got an app that is tracking it on her GPS and she just pushes the button every time she drives. Lots of us do. I think if you're traveling for work, you're entitled to be reimbursed, and the fee is 55 cents a kilometer. If you're going because you're hungry and you're going to get a handout from the food bank, that's not work travel.
The way I look at it is if the church allows the travel to be claimed, in my case, in every case I deal with, It has to be approved through the M&P before I see it and pay it.
Interesting.
It's all the expenses are approved through the M&P committee.
That's interesting. I haven't, my M&P committee doesn't care. They just trust me, but I've been in my church so long that it's scary how much power I've accumulated.
And that's a problem too.
Yes, it is. Absolutely, it is. So we've got
perspectives. I just wanted to mention from an HR perspective, it really boils down to what is your scope of responsibility and if it's within your role. If it is, then it's a part of your role, and if it isn't, then there's a different conversation to be had.
Yeah.
Well, and there are a bunch of questions, and I'm going to group them together because they really are all asking the same thing, and that is, what if the minister wants a reimbursement and isn't providing you with the detail of where she's gone or where she's traveled or who she's seen? Are you required to see a log that's the standard that the CRA requires before you pay out a thing? Or what if the minister simply refuses to give you that?
Well, it's not, again, this notion of the word refuse is interesting because it suggests other tensions, frankly. Some sensitivity around the individual. Again, that should be worked out locally, ideally in advance, but it's too late now. And you might get some different opinions here, but my take is the logging is not even a church requirement.
Oh. The logging is a CRA requirement, and we have to log addresses.
Yeah, and again, the business around some sensitivity around the individual, fine, but a resisting routine paperwork, maybe because they were able to resist it somewhere else. This is the kind of thing where, as a new treasurer, you need to involve your other governors in any of this. I mean, it sounds tiny, but it becomes an irritant and can hurt the relationship. And you really want to be, all our jobs as volunteers is to support and help the minister be as effective as possible. We're not policing their actions, but we're just trying to be faithful stewards.
Well, and I need to say there were times, particularly early on in my ministry, where we didn't have computers in our pockets, and I was trying to do all of this in a ledger sheet, that I simply didn't take the time to log it. But then I didn't try to claim it either. And I figured if I wasn't going to put the work into doing the record keeping that CRA wants, I didn't deserve to get paid out at the end. So I was walking away from money. That was the incentive to me to do it right. There were times in my life when I logged every penny, and there are other times when I say I can't be bothered, and this was a freebie for the church. So that's how I've handled it.
Okay.
Question about, do they get mileage when they're going from one point on the charge to the next? Presumably on a Sunday morning or something.
Yeah, that's exactly where the notion of a there isn't a right answer there. I mean, you can argue and defend the different interpretations, but that's where the idea of deducting, if you will, the amount of travel to at least the first charge and back is appropriate. Mm-hmm. Again, there is gray here because where is the place of work?
Place of work is where their office is.
Yes.
And it's only in one location, so they get paid going to the other charge.
And when I was in rural ministry, my office was in the manse. Yeah. And so I never had to drive to and from work because I just walked from one room to the next. And frankly, I'm working from home these days more often than not anyway. Yeah. But then I figured that my travel to any of my 3 points was work travel.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Other questions. We're finished, I think, with ministers' travel allowance. There's good conversation in the chat about it, and I think there's nothing new to say about that. Curious about the minister's clergy residence deduction. Curious if there's anybody out there with a T1213 application filed last fall that still hasn't come back to the minister. I would say 4 months is about what I'm experiencing, and Clyde said that, it's CRA takes a long time to do these things. Any other thoughts on that?
No, that's just a straight yes. And again, people did their job. They submitted it, and it's a bit of a frustration for everybody, but it is what it is.
I usually get my T1213 from Erik sometime in the end of September, but I can't always get it out of my own congregational treasurer till the end of October, which means that I'm often into January or February before I get my letter back, which is a pain.
And just to say, Erik doesn't have a clue how many he sends out and that his name's on them. There's a fantastic staffer, Diane Collier, who looks after all of that and makes me look good.
She sure does. And she's the one I challenge when I don't get it. Our minister has the letter back from CRA, but I don't know what to do with it now, says Betty. How do I get it into ADP?
Right.
That's something that you can do right in the ADP where you put in payroll changes. If you've got an employee with hours, you change them there. You can add a deduction, basically. I think that's the category it's under. And it gives you a place where you take and calculate out the amount that is to be reduced and not charged taxes as much. And if you put that in, and then you subtract that amount from the total pay that they receive, and that's what goes under the regular remuneration. Mm-hmm. It's a bit complex, and I have found the easiest way to deal with it, I call ADP. They can connect into my screen and they can say, yes, you're doing it right, or you're not doing it right.
Or call payroll team.
and you can, and I put a message in earlier about this, and I said that both of them, ADP and the UCC payroll team, excellent resources for us. Yeah. Both very helpful on that.
The other thing I would say is, as a minister with two different ministry jobs, it's not to my tax advantage to claim the whole thing. I only stop about half of what I'm entitled to, just because of the way it works. So just because the number on the letter comes back from CRA says you can withhold tax on such amount, you don't have to put that full number into ADP. Consult with the minister if they really want to use that full number or something less.
Yeah, and one other comment on that.
Yeah, the key point is it's the minister who says what they want, not the treasurer.
It's the minister's tax deduction, and it's the minister's paycheck. And at the end of the day, it's the minister who pays extra in April if you haven't deducted enough. And if the minister pays extra in April too often, you'll lose the chance to have it withheld at all.
That's right.
That's all the questions I got, folks.
Okay, we'll keep moving, and thank you, Angelica.
You're welcome.
Okay, so just a little bit on the reinsurance program. We're into it. Everything has been slow and late, as I kind of predicted up front. But the point being that we rushed this, and so if you're a December renewal and haven't renewed your insurance, first of all, if you're with the UCC Protect program that qualifies automatically for this, and you haven't heard something, we're trying to find you. We sent the renewal several times, but maybe it got to the wrong person. So let me say, anyone out there, if you're a December renewal and you haven't done this, we're trying to track you down. Send an email to me or to Maria. There's other emails listed here later on. The March renewal went out just over a week ago, again late, but with assurance of coverage and with the promised premium reductions. So again, if you are a March renewal, as my own church is, you should have received the online portal stuff to bind your coverage and take advantage of this program. In June, we think our timing will be a bit better, and then everybody will be on just to say, the March policies are for 9 months. The June policies will be for 6, because we're trying to set everything up on an annual cycle with a December renewal date. That's what we mean here by short policy, short-term policy. If you're a new entrant, we are underwriting policies daily now, and keep those coming. Because we are managing the backlogs, it's slower than it will be. But the whole idea of this was to get the savings to you, frankly, a year earlier than I would have done if I was trying to preserve my sanity. Again, if you are a new entrant, there is underwriting. It's still, the fact that we're trying to save congregations money comes out of reduced commissions, comes out of the absence of profit motive, but it still needs to be good insurance. We need a complete application, which is available online, a copy of the existing coverage, and we expect to offer double-digit savings, but we can't guarantee it because you have to be underwritten. Here's some news, though. There's a couple of things coming that are, I think, good news and coming out of this whole insurance initiative that you folks have so encouraged. We will have, first of all, the third-party insurance program will be available to all congregations, not just the ones participating in the affinity program. And we're just about to sign a deal with a new provider where the third-party insurance for your tenants and so on will be cheaper. There's a provision for an hourly fee, costing as opposed to daily, so there'll be cheaper prices, and it'll be available to all congregations online. So look, that will launch probably within a month, but I say Q2 for now. And regulars will have seen this slide. We're trying to be really transparent here. It isn't working quite yet the way we want it to, but we've got all kinds of automation coming in the next month or quarter anyway. And by December, we expect to have this thing really whipped into shape. And then what we should all do is everything possible to keep claims down. Because at the end of the day, the United Church is funding and sponsoring this insurance arrangement, but we're not immune from claims experience. If we keep the same claims experience we've had the last several years, then this thing will work beautifully, and we should all pray for that. Any questions on that aspect at all? The Angelica's piece, or
questions about the insurance that are coming up here? And I was typing and not reading them quickly enough. Our insurance policy renews June 1st. When should we contact the United Church to get an estimate under the co-insurance plan?
I would say middle or April for sure. Middle or end of April would be a good time.
Okay. And if we've got a June renewal, does it happen automatically, or do we have to let our current broker know that we're leaving?
It happens automatically, and the broker will know. In fact, if you don't want, what you should be doing is talking to your broker if you don't want to participate and get the saving. Right now, you're accepting some premium savings, and there's a bit of a trade-off where the service isn't where I want to get it to. But the broker will be notified anyway, because there's they deal with each other all the time. But the rest of it will happen automatically. In June 1, it should be in very early May. Our designated contact for insurance will get an email. And if any of you are the insurance person, it wouldn't hurt you to send an email to the UCC insurance thing to confirm that that's the email you want it to go to. One of the challenges here is if there is a local broker, as is in the past, we don't necessarily know who they were dealing with.
Thanks. Robin writes, our policy renews September, October 2022. We haven't received a copy of the new policy yet. Is one going to be sent out?
That's a send me an email. That sounds like a problem case.
Okay. Thank you. And so your email will be on the screen at the end of the webinar, Robin, just make a note of that, if you please.
Yeah. And if it's Robin Wright, we were just talking.
Got it. Good. As a new entrant, we weren't able to get info or a quote in time for our March renewal. However, I think that the pressure from your program has helped, and our insurance bill dropped this year versus last year, I guess with a different company.
Great news. It's be very unusual. I mean, there could be some competitive reaction to this. And if that individual wanted to send me the email with particulars, again, what we're trying to do is save money. So anything you can tell us about the competitive environment would be much appreciated. I actually suspect that there might be other reasons for that premium reduction, but I'd love to hear more about it.
Thank you. A little bit of confusion about the third-party insurance again. Can you remind us what that is and when you would need it?
The third-party insurance is for your tenants or people who are having events in your building, and we strongly recommend that all regular users should have their own insurance that you require of them, and that insurance can be purchased online and available. So basically, you're saying, hey, if you're renting from us, here's a portal that should help you get this easily.
And in my congregation, we require all of our renters to provide us a certificate of the insurance that they've bought. But I don't think when we started that policy, we knew that we could also refer them to the United Church's company and maybe get a better rate.
Yeah. So that's, as I say, that will be a value-added service, at least from my perspective. And the good news is it is, will be with a separate group, which means you won't get caught in our current backlog situation.
So any other, okay. Who should we contact if we have questions regarding our insurance?
The national contact is still the hub folks, or we'll have an email here, depending on the nature of your question. If the same way as Angelica's team, if you need help, there's an email later on, uccinsurance@unitedchurch.com, and similarly, there's a UCC Insurance at Hub. Those will be the two ways to go, and they have the 1-800 number and those things as well.
Good. Somebody writes, we have a June renewal date for UCC Protect. Our 2021 premiums to May were $359, but into May of 2013, they're now $535. Is that the increase you're talking about? It's about 50% increase.
No, and you should always, if your premiums have gone up, you should always understand why. Again, I'd have to see the specific case. But the reason your premiums would have gone up in the last year would have been either a claims rating. There was an increase. There was a premium increase, which is part of what we're unwinding from a year ago. So, or there could be catch-up premiums if you're on a pre-authorized and you missed a couple of months. So there's a couple of different things going on there. Another thing being, if you reported updated values or added something, that would also explain it.
So it doesn't hurt to give your broker a call, eh? And just sort of say, can you walk me through this?
Give your broker a call if there is one. Otherwise, the national hub team.
Okay. Those are the questions I'm seeing in this section.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And I really appreciate, I know how tough it is to keep on top of a chat box, and I gave up years ago.
Well, this is why I can only do it when I'm not presenting.
Well, there you go. But now you are. At
least in a group this big. So last question here from Janet that just came in after I said there were no more questions. Our December renewal was issued in the name of an old entity because we amalgamated in December 2022. We've asked multiple times to have this fixed, set up the banking details for payment until it's changed, but got an email the other day saying that the coverage is going to be canceled. Advice?
Well, my advice would have been to, I always tell treasurers this all the time, fix it going forward. We are trying to process in bulk hundreds, right now it's about 700 renewals. And so an administrative change, the best thing to do, particularly for just a clarification of something that's clearly documented somewhere, is to renew it and then follow up for the change. But you can also send me an email and I'll make sure that it's at least formally on the list, because things are pretty busy.
And let me commend to you, Janet, the extra webinar that Erik and Clyde recorded in February when we had to cancel our Ash Wednesday meeting, because that's exactly one of the things that the two of them were talking about, is how to deal with some of these special cases when amalgamations happen. So you can find that at ChurchX at the very bottom of the ChurchX page in the library of timeless content. And it is, what's it called? It's called Managing Your Church's Charitable Status. And that has to do with best practices when you're in the midst of organizational changes, in the midst of amalgamation or closure, when you've inadvertently lost your charitable status, or when the CRA comes to audit. That's Clyde's favorite day. So there's all kinds of valuable information in that webinar that only the three of us attended live. And you might, especially if you had an amalgamation within the last few months, you might find that really up your alley.
Okay, Stephen, you're going to keep going here.
Sure. So I get to change hats and be a presenter for just a couple of minutes. And that is that many of you will know by now that the General Counsel has worked really hard over the last few years to sort out a strategic plan so that we can devote our resources to the places where they're going to have the most bang for the buck. And one of the primary things that's important here is that everything we do, Indigenous stuff and leadership training and justice work and climate, is all working towards a sense that the organization needs to be streamlined, it needs to grow, it needs to help people grow spiritually and in every other way too. As a part of that, one of the things we're acknowledging is that some of these procedures that Erik talks to us about month after month after month drag us down and get in the way and use up valuable volunteer resources and just make us tired. And often in these webinars, frankly, Erik has been untangling some of the practices that have made us more tired than they need to. But there was a growing sense, I think, largely from the kind of emails that Erik gets, but also from some of the conversations we've had in these webinars, that we need to streamline some of our administrative procedures generally across congregations. And the General Counsel has wisdom to share and best practices to share and ways to draw us together so that we can learn from each other and find ways to do the work we need to do that don't drag us down. And so for my sins, and I will do penance, I'm sure, for years on this, I've been asked to lead a activity group that would look at all of the different administrative procedures we have in congregations and kind of expand the webinars for church treasurers into an audience that would also include trustees and property managers and church administrators and anybody else who's kind of doing the business side of the work we do together. And so the first kick at the can I took at that was to do a bit of a survey with you in the 25th of January webinar. And I wanted to share with you some of what we learned by doing that webinar. So first of all, to say, you gave me 12 pages of comments. I spent several days just trying to organize them and put some order into the chaos. Wow, thank you. Thank you for your wisdom and your thoughts and your excitement and the ways that you participated. That was a lot to read, and it's been extremely useful. So thank you for that. One of the things that came shining through that is how much you folks are appreciating these webinars that Erik and Clyde and Angelica have been offering for the last few years. And thank you for that too. It's a significant chunk of work for the four of us to pull this together every month. And I think Erik does the lion's share of pulling the agenda together, but all three of us are giving up evening time to come and be with you online. And when we get that kind of appreciation, it makes it worth it. So we're so glad these have been helpful. And thank you for being clear about that. And finally, the one thing that came through as an answer to almost every question I asked is volunteer fatigue and succession planning. Every aspect of church business that I asked for, I got comments coming back saying, I don't know who's going to replace me, and I'm getting tired, and I don't have time to do it all, and nobody else wants this job. So that's real, and that's honest. And if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. That is part of it, and that just underlines why it's important to try to offer some support from the national church around how to make the job easier, how to train people to pick up the reins a little more easily, maybe how to tease apart some of the jobs that drag us down from some of the jobs that feed us. So that's kind of where we're going forward with that. And then if you could move us on to the next slide, if you please. So one of the things that came through clearly is that you would like more programs and resources and webinars about onboarding new treasurers and volunteers. That's something that has been really appreciated, but that sometimes it can feel like these webinars assume more knowledge than some of us have. And some basic sort of beginning how-to, being a church treasurer for dummies, I think was what somebody said. And so particularly in these four areas, payroll and how to do bookkeeping in ways that are going to make all the reportings that we have to do easier. How do you choose insurance coverage, and how do you weigh them, and what kinds of things do you ask for? Or how do you manage rentals and leasing? I mean, that can be a significant source of income and also a significant source of headaches. So those four areas in particular, I heard people asking for. And I was just going to pause and ask you a quick question here. And that is, if we were going to start with one of those, which is the most important to you of those four? Or if you had something else, then add your thought into the chat.
Interesting to see the numbers move.
Yeah, you know what? Those of us who are hosts and co-hosts can watch the numbers move, and the rest of the people, I can't show it to you until it closes. But it's kind of like election night as the numbers come in.
It's certainly looking like Clyde's got up for the next one.
I think, Clyde, you're in trouble here.
It would appear that way.
So we've got 73% of people participating. And intro to bookkeeping for churches is the number one issue here. Angelica, you're next, intro to payroll. And then followed closely by intro to managing rentals and leases. And Erik, you can do insurance coverage, but sometime in 2025, I think nobody cares about that. I'm being flippant, but there's the quick and dirty results. Just in case you're interested, I thought it was kind of cool. Let me move on to the next slide. Yeah, James says, I would have said all of the above for a new treasurer. And you know what? I will capture the notes in the chat. So I really was clear about that. If you clicked other, or if you have other suggestions, like put them in the chat. We really are still at the beginning of this. Another thing that really came through, and I think it's part of why Erik spent so much time on it tonight, is that working with other volunteers in the pastoral charge is often causing conflict. And there seems to be conflict between treasurers and finance committees and property managers and trustees and boards, and who's responsible for what and what happens when they don't all agree, and how do decisions get made. And that kind of thing came through, again, in multiple different ways. And so, again, I think one of the things we need to be focusing on, not only on our onboarding, but maybe even kind of once a year, is just a reminder how all those different roles work and how they are intended to kind of dovetail together, and some suggestions around that, because clearly there's some concerns about where that's coming from. we had requests for a kind of best practices webinar on these 5 different topics. It would just be an opportunity to share what's working well and what isn't, and how some churches are doing it, and learn from each other. And the topics that kind of jumped out at us there: managing aging buildings, choosing and maintaining computer software, what software is best, what should we use for accounting or anything, or booking software or that kind of thing. Choosing and maintaining hardware. Somebody said to me, our church computer is 10 years old and is not doing it anymore. Do you think I can go and ask the board to pay for a new one? And I wanted to say yes, but you know, what is the life?
Right answer.
What is the life of computer hardware, and how often should we be budgeting for this? And we really can't do this work anymore without it. 4 years.
Depends on how much it's used. I replace my computer every 3 years.
Yeah, well, mine is 5 and it's failing. I've got to get a new one. So there you go. Fundraising and stewardship development is something that came out, and I kind of wanted to point people to some of our fundraising and stewardship development programs that we're already offering in United in Learning. But that was a big one. And then just sort of streamlining admin procedures. How do you store stuff? Can you use cloud storage? Can you put all your receipts online? What about credit cards and all of those kinds of admin procedures that might make it easier to do all this work without somebody having to come down to the church every week to sign checks. So given that list, again, and the fact that we'll probably do all of them eventually, but what should we start with? What would be the one that you would be most likely to attend?
So far, I'm seeing follow the money.
Yes, stewardship development, admin procedures, and managing aging buildings are what's coming up really, really big right now. We've got 101 of 126 participants have answered already. Ha! My church computer gets replaced when someone in the congregation gets a new one and donates their old one to me. Ouch.
Ooh.
Ouch. Okay, I'm going to cut it off there because we've got 85% of people responding, and you should at least see that. So that's the spread on that one. I think that's kind of interesting. Thank you. And my last question is, what have I missed on this list? And you've already written some of that into the chat, but add it in now. What are the topics that I failed to ask about, or that I failed to kind of summarize tonight? What are the things that are going to make your life easier, make it easier to find your successor, make it easier for your board to focus on mission and ministry and a little less on the deficit this year? While you're doing that, let me talk to you about some of the dreams we have for where this could go. First of all, clearly the webinars for church treasurers is one of the best things we've created since sliced bread, and we certainly are not going to get rid of it. But we are actively considering expanding the audience and maybe even changing the title so that it would also include an invitation to people who are trustees or property managers or payroll managers or church administrators or some of the other folks who do the other kinds of business that intersect with the business that a treasurer does. So we are currently using the feedback you gave us both in January and tonight and canvassing a few extra people that have expertise in these areas too, planning for a slightly revised series of topics for this group starting in September or October 2023 and moving on from there. But we're also aware that we have the ability now within ChurchX to start assembling and creating resources that could be accessible to you, not just once a month, but whenever you want to log in. And so as we imagine the kinds of things we might want to do, there's 4 on the screen there that I kind of thought might be useful. We could create a best practices wiki. Now, a wiki is kind of like like Wikipedia. It's a series of articles that we can all contribute to and all edit and all add to. I think it would take somebody to animate it because most of us aren't used to contributing to wikis. But it would be a library of best practices, ways that people do things in their own congregation that they found helpful. And we'd probably have somebody like Clyde or Erik look it over to make sure that we're not getting bad advice. But it could be a kind of crowdsourced library of best practices. Some people have suggested that maybe it would be helpful to have a regional list of preferred vendors. If you're trying to buy office supplies, or you're trying to buy cleaning supplies, or you're trying to go and find somebody who knows how to repair stained glass windows or steam heat in 80-year-old buildings, who are the vendors who've been good? Who has worked out for you? What would you do to recommend them or not? That's going to be very regionally based because nobody's going to travel too far to get a furnace technician. But we wondered whether this would be a place to host that kind of list or whether that's getting too granular. We wondered whether it would be helpful to have some boilerplate leasing contracts. If you're going to rent your basement room to a Montessori school, do you want to see a contract that some lawyer in my congregation drew up for ours? Would that be a helpful starting point as you start to develop your own leases? So those are some of the things we are considering. And finally, maintenance checklists. Like most of us know nothing about maintaining commercial sized buildings. If we do maintenance at all, we're handy persons maintaining our own houses, residences. But I don't know where to buy a janitor's mop or which ones are good and which ones are worth the money. Maybe it would be helpful to have a checklist for how you take care of a commercial building. So those are some of the tools we wondered about creating. And again, over the years, we may well create all four. But if we were going to start with one, which one would we start with? Which would be most useful to you?
I don't know what to predict on this one. Actually, I have a bet on Wiki, but let's see.
Oh. Well, the Wiki is winning right now. That's interesting.
And just to say, that is a retirement dream of mine, to spend some time on this before I go.
Well, you are not allowed to retire until we get this going better than it is right now, Erik.
Fair enough.
And neither am I. So we're both looking at that end of the job career spectrum, aren't we? Again, just to save time, I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you for your responses, friends. There's the results that I saw. 102 of the 125 participants. So I think that's a pretty good survey of where we're at. And I will stop sharing that and move it out of the way.
Comprehensive.
So simply to say and to remind you that we do have this page at ChurchX. That's what it looks like today. And I'm starting to reorganize it a little bit because it's getting a little unwieldy. I'm putting in a few graphics so it's easier to find our way around. We are starting to create a library of timeless content at the end of it, in addition to just lists of these live webinars. I hope this becomes a library of resources for you. There's also a forum that you can use where if you put a note to the forum, everybody will see it and we'll get an answer out to everybody by using that forum. And that's a way to ask a question that everybody in the group might find helpful, even between our live meetings. So those are the things we're working on. It's not all going to happen in the first month, but the stuff that you've given me tonight will shape our conversations as we start to plan what to unroll first come the fall. And thank you for giving me the time to do that. So if you'd like to be a part of our steering group, a couple of you have already volunteered, and I'd be glad to involve a couple more people as well. Basically, we want a few people to sit down with me and noodle through all of this stuff and plan out how we're going to organize it and deliver it and who a good resource person might be and which ones we should do first, and sort of oversee this so that it continues to serve your needs as well as it can. So drop me an email or put your name in the chat, and I would love to rope you into that. For those of you who volunteered after the January program, I didn't get back to you. I got swamped by 12 pages of comments, and it has taken me a while to wade through all of that and produce this much, but I will be calling that meeting, I hope, within the next few weeks now. Erik, okay, back to you.
Yeah, okay, folks. First of all, thank you. And to say a couple of things we have in mind for next time. I hope to have some announcements, formal announcements on the insurance side. Also, Buying United, I think will probably be joining us. We talked about procurement as one of the things, but there's a newly launched deal that we'll be talking about. And also, it'll be just shortly after Earth Week. So I think folks want a couple of themes will come out of that: responsible investing, and also what we're doing nationally, the Faithful Footprints program, which is a grant program, all kinds of greening type ideas. This isn't just about being green or something. This kind of stuff saves the church money too. So those are the themes that we have in mind for next time for the live webinar. And I'm also hearing loud and clear that we may schedule a separate live webinar focusing on new treasurers and giving you some more intensive work that longer time treasurers already know that stuff. So expect that in for April, I would think. Here are the usual contact ones. The new one there, someone was asking earlier about the insurance program. This is, of course, if you are insured with what we now call UCC Protect United. If you're insured somewhere else, ask your broker. And Angelica's team is featured here. It's also statistics season, so very, very important. We talked about the importance of that, and we'll stress that again with new treasurers. Again, for new treasurer or old treasurer, if all of you should be on this, have your My Business account by now. But frankly, I found a few regions that didn't, so we're helping them get theirs. The world is going this way so fast that you can't hide from that anymore. There's our usual contact stuff will be on the slides. Response times will vary, especially mine, maybe Clyde's during tax season, and maybe Stephen's during Lent. Angelica is always very responsive. And
one of us is.
and thank you again for what you do. We talked about how difficult this role is to recruit to and transition. And I just want to stress over and over again, best to do it early and upfront, but don't be afraid to push back on principle. And anytime there's a decision that you're uncomfortable with, involve the whole board. Do not wear it yourself. Do not carry it yourself. Do not lose sleep over it yourself. And that's advice I give you, having failed at that for the first several years of being a treasurer. That's something you have to learn to roll with. And again, in case anyone's forgotten, remind yourself about rule number 1, which, if you flip back, was, it's not about me. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, friends. It's always a delight to be able to connect with you this way, and it has yet again been an action-packed evening with lots and lots of details to sort out, but also underlying it, I think, a strong sense that the work you do matters, and the details that you follow allow the church to be the church and to do God's work in a hurting world. So go, and blessings to you, and blessings as we move into Holy Week and into Easter. Blessings as the days get lighter and we move towards a season of regeneration and renewal. Blessings for a holy Easter, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at the end of April. Bye for now. Mm-hmm.